they're specialized in tailwheel and aerobatic training. So if anybody here needs a tailwheel endorsement or has flown tailwheel before 1991, which was the cutoff date, but is not really current and needs some recurrency training, they not only are sponsoring this class, so they're buying us lunch, by the way, when we break at the end of the morning, but they also will offer whoever was in the class a discount, about 10% for tailwheel endorsement, tailwheel training, which they do in Supercar. And they also do aerobatic training. I think Rich, you're over there. You did a Great Lakes program, right, over there. So it's kind of fun. You can get the whole aerobatics training and then rent their Great Lakes and even do some competition aerobatics if you want. But that's the basic tailwheel training is kind of partnered with Chandler Air Service for this. You want information, you get the phone number there. The website is kind of easy to remember. It's aerobatics.com. The purpose of this class, and there's a lot of experience in this room, and I respect everybody's experience here. I'm not the teacher today. I think in tailwheel airplanes, I consider the aircraft to be the teacher. And what I'm going to try to do today is to explain what's going on sometimes. And there's a wonderful concept. How many flight instructors are here in the room? There's a bunch, right? You remember the FOI, the wonderful fundamentals of instructions? There's this concept that I really like where the student is taught different concepts, and when put in context, the student gains insight of what is really happening. So that's what we're going to try to do today, is gain an insight on what happens when we fly a tailwheel airplane, and God forbid when things start to not go right, and gaining this insight may allow us to react properly and avoid bad things to happen. So a quick show of hand here. Who has never set foot in a tailwheel airplane in this room? No one, okay. Who has not soloed in a tailwheel airplane ever? Okay, we have a few people here. Okay, who has soloed in a tailwheel airplane? Can you raise your hand? Okay, good. Now, keep your hand up, please. For those who have soloed in a tailwheel airplane, those who do not know anyone personally who has been in a mishap in a tailwheel airplane, please lower your hand. You don't know anyone that has been in a mishap? Okay. For those who have never been in a mishap in a tailwheel airplane and fly tailwheel airplanes, lower your hand. Okay. So is there only a few people that have been in a mishap in a tailwheel airplane? I don't believe that. You don't want to recognize it, maybe?
Fine, mishap.
So who has been in more than one mishap in a tailwheel? No, I didn't ask. Supposed to be only one, right? Well, you know what they say. They say that smart people learn from their mistake, and really smart people learn from others' mistakes. I'm not that smart. I need to make my own mistakes usually, and I'm trying to make them one at a time, make sure I get them all covered, and then I can only learn. Hopefully here we can share some experience and get to the point where we remember, well, he did that wrong, and I'm going to try not to do this wrong myself. But hopefully it's not wishful thinking, right? So for those who have never flown a tailwheel airplane before, this is our little L-16, and it's not a very complex airplane that we can't really say it's complex. You know, it has fixed gear, fixed pitch prop, it climbs at 70, cruises at 70, lands at 70 pretty much. It's as basic as you can, right, as you can find. It's what? Sky's at 85 horsepower engine, 90 horsepower engine. When we train in more complex airplane, usually when somebody gets to an airplane that is faster, we have a tendency to fall behind the airplane, right? Everybody's done that, and then we catch up and we get better at it. Do you think we could fall behind in an airplane like this if we flew a more complex airplane? Some people say yes. The thing is, if we fall behind in a faster airplane, usually we're in the air and hopefully we have time to recover and get back in front of the airplane and get back in control of it. if we fall behind a tailwheel airplane, if that happens on the runway, bad things may ensue, right? So we're going to talk today about what can happen in a tailwheel airplane and how to avoid bad things. So first, let's watch a movie, shall we? I think it's a mall, and maybe the approach is not really stabilized here, but I don't want to judge. Oh, it's a tailwheel airplane. I like the fact that the guy on the right turns to the guy on the left and says, "What did you just do?" We're going to look at some photos here, and it's not judgment, right? We're not going to try to judge or second guess what happened. This is a T6. But it's important to see that things like that can happen and do happen. That's a Super Cub right there. That's another Super Cub. That was on the Ag Strip just north of Maricopa.
Isn't that walk-ups?
Yep. Yeah, that was a renter who got checked out and decided to take I think it was a she decided to take her boyfriend with her on a little trip and went to do a landing on the dirt strip over there. That's a Great Lakes. Next one is a DC-3, I believe. That's another T6. And that's a Cessna 195. First time I saw this photo, it took me a little while to realize what was really happening there. The runway is going this way, right?
Uh-huh.
So once again, we're not trying to make fun of people because, God forbid, it could be us there. But there's things to learn about this kind of behavior, and maybe we can learn how to avoid this. Because it's a fact of life that pilots that are new to tailwheel aircraft will sooner or later be embarrassed by the aircraft, right? And the point of the training is to get done with the embarrassment when the instructor is on board, and hopefully the embarrassment stays private, because the tailwheel instructors don't talk, right? We don't kiss and tell. But if the embarrassment becomes public, then, well, we can't do anything about it. So the question is, why is all this happening? Why do loss of control like this happen in tailwheel aircraft? And so today we're going to talk about lateral stability, we're going to talk about left turning tendencies. That's not a political thing, right? It's just an aircraft thing. We're going to talk about coordinated flight. We're going to talk about reversals. We're going to talk about spins. And we're also going to talk about how to prevent those incidents by using proper procedure, proper technique, and using our experience and maybe others' experience too, to benefit from. So let's start with regulations. There's two regulations that pertain to flying a tailwheel airplane. 6131 spells out that unless you have soloed a tailwheel airplane before 1991, you need what is called a tailwheel endorsement that is provided by an instructor in your logbook. That's what we were talking about earlier, the training at Chandler Air Service. Another regulation is 6157 that spells out that recent requirement to act as a pilot in command in a tailwheel airplane, in addition to the regular requirement to have made 3 takeoff and landing in the preceding 90 days. In this case, you need to have performed 3 takeoff and landing to a full stop in a tailwheel airplane in the preceding 90 days before taking passengers with you. So the question is, why did the FAA decide that we need special requirements for tailwheel airplanes? Why not the regular regulations? Was it not enough? And the fact is, some people think that tailwheel airplanes are more difficult to fly, or maybe more difficult to land. Maybe tailwheel airplanes are not more difficult to fly. Maybe tricycle gear airplanes are easier to fly. Maybe it's the other way around. Is a tailwheel pilot a better pilot? Some people ask the question. Maybe it's not that the tailwheel pilot is a better pilot. Maybe it's that a tailwheel airplane will require the pilot to maintain a level of control that is not required in a tricycle gear airplane, because a tricycle gear airplane is more forgiving. So we're going to look at the details of this. But it's a fact of life that some tricycle gear airplanes are much easier, and sometimes people develop bad habit flying tricycle gear airplanes around. It's more forgiving. So why do we want to fly tailwheel airplane if it's that unforgiving? Well, I think we want all to be like Billy secretly. This is Billy Walker here, this German. You're cool.
We should be basing this on looks.
Well, no, but you look cool. We can never compete with your looks in the airplane, but at least we can try. So to get there, we need to leave our zone of comfort and go out there. So, an airplane that's as basic as you want, like the L-16, a nice J3 here. An airplane is an airplane, right? There's not much difference when we fly the airplane. It's still the same concept. You have the wing, you have the empennage, you have the controls. All that is the same. When it gets interesting is on the ground, things tend to be a little different. The main difference between a tricycle gear airplane and a tailwheel airplane is on the ground. A tailwheel airplane has negative stability, when a tricycle gear airplane has positive stability. So what is negative stability? Let's start with neutral stability. Neutral stability, the big definition is you take an object, you put it in a different position, it stays where you put it, that's neutral stability. So if you take a marble on a flat surface, you just leave it there, it's not going to move. You put it in a different place on the same flat surface, you leave it there, it's not going to move. That's neutral stability, right? What is positive stability? Positive stability is you move an object and it will return to its position of equilibrium. So if you take a marble, the same marble, you put it in a bowl, and you put it on the bottom of the bowl, it's good, it's not going to move. Now you take this marble and you move it to the side of the bowl and you let go. What's going to happen? Well, the marble is going to go back and forth and eventually settle in the same position it was at the beginning, in the bottom of the bowl. It goes back to its position of equilibrium, and that is positive stability, right? Well, this is how a tricycle gear airplane works. We're going to show that in a minute. And then there's negative stability. What is negative stability? Well, you take this same marble, the same bowl, now you turn the bowl upside down, and you put the marble on top of the bowl in the very middle of the bowl, and you leave it there. It's going to stay there if you do it right. But if you look at it the wrong way, if you blow on it, if a gust of wind comes or a little vibration, then it will be the smallest disturbance, the little marble is going to fall off the bowl. And that is negative stability. And guess what? That's exactly how tailwheel airplane reacts on the runway, on the ground. If you take a tricycle gear airplane, and you picture, so the center of gravity is obviously between the main gears and the nose wheel, and you picture that the momentum of the aircraft, when it's on the landing roll, let's say, it's like pulling the aircraft with a string attached to the CG. A tricycle gear airplane, if you have a little disturbance, let's say it goes to the left, like on this diagram, if you pull it by the string on the CG there, it's going to straighten itself. That's positive stability. Any deviation will self-correct. Now if you have a tailwheel airplane, if you have still the string that represents the momentum pulling the airplane from its CG, and you have a deviation to the side, the momentum will push the airplane and the deviation will amplify. And that's negative stability, and that's what we have to deal with when we taxi a tailwheel airplane. It's a little bit like, if you drive a car in reverse. It's very unstable. Every single motion will self-amplify if you don't control it. So, on a tailwheel airplane, you need to make sure you keep the motion, you keep the momentum going straight, otherwise this is going to happen. If you go back to our marble on the top of the ball there, imagine that the marble represents the energy of the airplane, the momentum of the airplane. And suppose that for just 1 second that you're controlling your marble with your rudder pedals here. So the marble is on the top and it starts to go to the right, and you push the left rudder and keep the marble back in the center, and everything is fine. Well, let's suppose you're a little slow and you let the marble go a little further before you correct it. Well, now you need to push more rudder to get the marble back to the center, and the chances are you're going to go on the other side and you'll have to go back and forth several times to keep the thing centered and the thing under control, right? Well, there's a point that if you let it go too far, you're going to have to use full rudder to get the marble back to the center, or at least to get moving back towards the center. And chances are there that you will definitely need to go back and forth several times to prevent it from going off the deep end on the other side. But guess what? There's a point that even with full rudder deflection, you cannot get it back. And that's when this ground aerobatic maneuver called the ground loop happens, unfortunately. So the key is what here? There's two components to this. The first component is to detect that the marble is moving, detect that the momentum of the aircraft is going sideways. How do you do that? Well, you finely tune your butt, you look outside, it comes with experience, it comes with, practice. And the second component of that, once you have detected the deviation early, you need to correct it quickly. If you detect the deviation but you sit on your hands and wait until it goes too far, then it does you no good. You need to detect it early and fix it quickly. Those are the two things. But when you fix it quickly, you need to make sure you don't go too far on the other side, because it's no good either, right? If you fix it too hard, then, and actually I think it's not a proven fact, but I like statistics. We were talking about that the other day, Rich. I like statistics. I think, what do they say? 42.7% of all statistics are just made up on the spot. But in terms of statistics, I think that, from what I've seen, a lot of ground loop happen on the opposite side of the initial deviation, right? Because the airplane goes one way, and it's just before the little marble falls off the deep end, and the pilot uses so much rudder that now it goes the other way, and that's when control is lost. So the key is to detect early and fix quickly, but not over control. And that's a skill that we need to develop as tailwheel pilot that tricycle gear pilot I don't think need to develop, and I call that aggressive finesse. You aggressively need to fix the deviation, but you need finesse, because if you don't have finesse, you're going to go off the other way.
Bob Jacobson used to call it happy feet.
Happy feet is another way to look at it, yes. Happy feet, aggressive finesse, whatever you want to call it, the concept is detect the deviation early and fix it quickly before things get out of hand. Because otherwise, this happens. There's another concept, because I'm a computer geek at heart, and I don't know if maybe some people here were not born, but back in the 80s, remember the computers back in the 80s, the big thing was the IBM PC. And the IBM PC was running at 4.77 megahertz. Wow, that was cool. And now we buy a Pentium 3 at 2.3 gigahertz. You know what the megahertz, gigahertz mean in those computers? I'm not going to bore you with computer stuff this morning, don't worry. Don't get me started. But that's called the clock speed of the processor, right? And that's kind of the heartbeat of the computer. The faster the clock speed, the faster the computer runs. And if you, like me, have been in front of a computer and go, geez, this thing is slow, what's going on? I need a faster computer, right? We've all been there. What is a faster computer? Well, it's a computer with a higher clock speed that can do more things in the same amount of time. The way I look at back to flying, the way I look at a pilot landing a tailwheel airplane, we need to raise our clock speed when we come to landing. We need to be able to detect things faster, react quicker. We need to pump ourselves up, happy feet, like my guy was doing, happy feet, and condition ourselves before landing to make sure that we are able to react in time to the challenges that our airplane is going to throw our way, because the airplane is going to, what the beauty with the tailwheel airplane is that the airplane doesn't know how many thousands of hours the pilot has. It will embarrass everybody equally. It doesn't care about what your experience is, it will embarrass everybody the same way. Equal opportunity. So we need to raise our clock speed and develop this aggressive finesse. So, we talked about negative stability, we talked about aggressive finesse. There's a few things that make an airplane, the tailwheel airplane, not too unstable in certain conditions. When is a tailwheel airplane stable on the ground? When it's tied down with chocks, right? But seriously, when is it not too unstable? There's several components of the airplane, several forces that act to help with the negative stability. It's not going to make the airplane stable, but it will maybe reduce a little bit the negative stability. One of them is the vertical stabilizer, that as long as there's airflow going on it, it's going to help keep the airplane straight. The one big one is the engine, the power. Remember the little diagram that we're showing with the momentum of the aircraft? The way I like to look at it is when you're landing, the momentum is kind of pushing the aircraft on, right? When you're taking off, the engine is pulling the aircraft, but when you're landing, you're being pushed by the weight of the airplane. And that's where really negative stability is at its worst. If you add some power, then you're pulling the airplane from the propeller, from the front, and things are a little less unstable that way. What are the other factors that keep the airplane less unstable on the ground? Well, the tailwheel is a big factor. When the tailwheel is on the ground, the friction, and we lock the tailwheel on B-17 on the C-45, that gives us some friction that makes the airplane resist any deviation. It's not going to resist completely. It's a little help, but at least it's some help. So when the tailwheel is on the ground and there's weight on the tailwheel, the friction will help a little bit with stability. What is the most important factor to help with stability? Well, it's the pilot. The pilot can use the rudder. In multi-engine airplane, the pilot can use differential power if needed. You could also use brakes, but that's a whole different story. But the pilot is the biggest help in the stability of the airplane. If you take an airplane with no pilot, a tailwheel airplane, it's not going to go straight, it's going to go in the dirt, obviously. So, but thousands and most takeoff, most landing do not, fortunately, end up in a ground loop. So the pilot is the biggest factor for stability. So when is the aircraft the most unstable? When the power is off, so the prop is not pulling the airplane, but the momentum is pushing the airplane, that's not the best situation, right? Another situation is when the tail is low, but the tail is not on the ground. When that happens, well, you don't have the benefit of having the tail on the ground with the friction that prevents deviation. So you have the vertical stabilizer and you have the rudder, but guess what? The vertical stab and the rudder are not perpendicular to the airflow in this situation. So they lose effectiveness when the tail is low, but the tail is not on the ground. And when the airspeed is low, that's not good for stability either, because now you have less airflow on the vertical stabilizer and the rudder. So when is the airplane on the ground the least unstable? When the pilot is awake, that's a big one. 2, when the power is pulling the airplane as opposed to the momentum pushing the airplane. It's fairly rare, it can happen, but it's fairly rare when a mishap, a tail airplane happens on takeoff. Most, it's my statistics again, my fake statistics, but I think most ground loop happens during the landing roll, not on the takeoff roll. They can still happen, but for different reasons. So when the power is pulling the airplane, it's a little less unstable. When the tail is on the ground and the stick back, you have a little more stability because now you have some friction that prevents lateral deviation. Or if the tail is up, and we can talk about this, Billy, but when the tail is a little higher and the airflow is perpendicular to the vertical stabilizer and you have relative wind going on the tail, that's a little less unstable also. You have better control. The thing is, the faster you go, the faster things happen. The benefit there is if you go fast, you have more airflow on the rotors, so you have better control effectiveness. But if you go fast and you don't have airflow, that's when things really kind of get tricky, right? So the end of the landing roll, or if you're taxiing too fast, that's when things can get pretty ugly. So, we talked about this already, but aggressive finesse, increase your clock speed. Use full control deflection on the rotor if needed, but don't over control. Those are a lot of skills that are not easy to obtain when we're new to that, right? So how can we practice the aggressive finesse part? Well, obviously we can do lots of landings, and I like doing lots of landings, it's always fun. But doing landings to practice those skills are a little inefficient because we take off, we do downwind, we do base, we do final, and there we have a few seconds we're going to be able to practice the aggressive finesse in controlling the airplane. We're wasting a lot of time in the pattern for just a few seconds of actual training. So it's good to have a way to practice those very skilled and those very sensations in a more efficient way. And there is such a maneuver, and that's what I call the delayed recovery stall. Some people call it a falling leaf. I prefer to call it delayed recovery stall because I think if you do a real falling leaf, you're not doing it right. But we're going to get to that in just a second. The beauty of the delayed recovery stall is that you can practice the same sensations and the same control input that you have on the landing roll at a safe altitude. It's a deep stall. You keep the power off. You keep the stick back. You stay in the stall. And you don't recover from the stall right away, but you keep the wings level. Now, if you don't do this right, what can happen there? The airplane will want to go sideways like this. What can happen if we don't pay attention there, we can get into a spin. So let's review this real quick before we go any further. What are the steps to spin recovery? Okay, anyone? Let me take a break here. Spin recovery, number 1. Power off. Who said that? Power off. That's a really, really important one. Maybe not the most important, but a really, really, really important one. A lot of people are going to say, no, it's opposite rudder. No, power off first. When I was working at Chandler Air Service, we used to teach advanced spins, and we would demonstrate flat spins. Guess how you come into a flat spin when you do from a normal spin to a flat spin? You apply power. If you have power on during a spin, it's going to flatten, it's going to go do gyroscopic motions, don't know really. Power off is a really important one. Then second, very important, full opposite rudder. We all know this. Full is the key also. This last quarter inch of rudder displacement can make a huge difference in the spin recovery. Power off, full opposite rudder. Then what's next? I'm sorry? Neutral ailerons is a good one. Stick forward to neutral. Neutral aileron is a really good one, and we're going to talk about ailerons in a minute. If you use anti-spin aileron in a spin, that's actually going to accelerate the spin. You don't want that. Stick forward to neutral to break the stall. And then when the rotation stops, we neutralize our rudders, right? Then from there, we're in about 60-degree nose down attitude in most aircraft and want to go back to level flight. And the key there is to recover to a flat attitude before the speed builds up. You don't want to wait too long, because if you wait too long, that's when you're going to overstress the airplane when you see the wind rushing at you. So you want to recover quickly, but beware of secondary stalls, of course, we don't want to do. Okay, so we've done the spin review. So we're back into our delayed recovery stall. We have the power off, we have the stick back, and we're in a deep stall, and we're staying in the deep stall. What do you think is going to happen? Well, in any airplane that I've seen, sooner or later, one of the wings is going to dip, right? The wings are not going to stay flat, or if they do, well, that's a miracle, I think. So let's say the left wing dips. How do we correct that? Rudder? Anybody thinking aileron? Probably not in this class, but why don't we use aileron to fix that? If a wing dips, the natural tendency of everybody, without thinking too much, unless you've been trained properly, would be to use aileron, right? Well, what happens if we use aileron in a stall? Yes. So this is a typical wing. You have the green line is the angle of attack. The red line is the relative wing. The stall happens when you reach the critical angle of attack. So we're in a stall. We have already reached the critical angle of attack. The left wing has dipped. And let's suppose we put right aileron because we don't know any better. What happens? Right aileron. The right aileron goes up, the left aileron goes down. When the left aileron goes down, we actually increase the angle of attack of the wing. But the wing is already stalled. It's already at the critical angle of attack. So now it's past the critical angle of attack, right? What happens in a stall? Well, we lose lift and we have tons of drag. So, well, here, we're going to have even more drag. So we're in a left wing low attitude, we put right aileron, and now we have even more drag on the left side, and the airplane is going to bank even further to the left. So this is a phenomenon called aileron reversal. And that's not cool. We want to bank to the right, we put right stick, we bank to the left. We don't really have time to think too much about this, right? When this happens. So it's good to talk about it before. The way I used to teach spins to my students at Chandler is that I was telling them an aircraft is 3 different machines in one. An aircraft that is taxiing has a specific set of controls. An aircraft that is flying is a different machine with a different set of controls. If you apply the brakes to an airplane that is flying, nothing's going to happen, at least until you land, and then things are going to happen. But that's a different story. But if you use, if you use the elevator on an aircraft that is taxiing, not much is going to happen either. So it's 2 different machines. Well, guess what? A stalled aircraft is a 3rd machine with a different set of controls. If you're stalled, and you pull the stick back, you're not going to have the same result than if the airplane is flying and you pull the stick back, right? The thing is, accident happens in stalls and spin because people try to use a flying aircraft set of controls in a stalled aircraft. And that doesn't work that way. So if you are stalled and you use aileron to keep the wings level or to control your bank, you may suffer from aileron reversal because you're in a stalled aircraft, you're not in a flying aircraft. So if you try that tomorrow in a Cessna 172, you probably will not see aileron reversal. Anybody knows why? Wing warp is the answer, yes. The wing on modern airplane is not flat. It is set to the fuselage at a higher angle of incidence than the wing tip. And actually the way it's designed is the wing root is going to stall and the wing tip will be flying in every condition. Even with full aileron deflection, the wing tip will never stall on more modern aircraft. So you will never experience aileron reversal in modern aircraft. Guess what? We're not flying modern aircraft.
Can I offer a comment?
Sure.
That is sometimes one of the differences between military aircraft and civilian. Civilian aircraft have to be built to civilian specifications, and that includes wing warp, Military aircraft do not have that specification, so they may not have wing work, which is why they cannot be licensed standard category.
Guess what we're flying here? I've heard that the DC-3 is really good into demonstrating aileron reversal in the stall. I think the B-17 is pretty good too. The SNG is
DC-3
good.
will snap over the top on you.
Well, there you go. Well, guess what? We're flying older airplanes here. The fact that these older airplanes were not designed with these corrections, it's even worse than that if you think at it from distance here. We're not only flying older airplanes, we're flying older trainers. What makes a good trainer? Being demonstrated for those effects, right? So not only those airplanes have those effects, but they were built to show the student those effects. And actually to weed out the student, to filter. The Stearman was built as a trainer, it was designed to be hard to fly. So when the pilot would go to bigger airplanes, it would be a little easier for them because the hard part was done early. Same thing for the SNJ. Sky has a wonderful BT-13. I love that airplane, but it's really easy to fly compared to the SNJ. The SNJ is a really good trainer. The Stearman is a really good trainer. It's very demonstrative. All these effects that we were going to talk about in a minute, we're going to review that real quick, aileron reversal being one of them. We are going to see them in the aircraft that we fly, and we better know about them beforehand. So this is a typical falling leaf. Well, that's a falling leaf. That's not a delayed recovery stall. Once again, delayed recovery stall, the goal is to keep the wings level. In the falling leaf, these guys they're just having fun. I think the instructor had much more fun than the student. So that's a falling leaf. We don't do that. We do delayed recovery stall, and we've done it in the L-16, the Stearman, I do it in the SNJ. The goal is to keep the wings level by using the rudder. And guess what? We have the exact same sensation and the exact same control inputs that we need when we are on the landing roll in a tailwheel airplane. That's a wonderful training maneuver right there. So let's we're talking about older airplanes, and still not political, let's talk about left-turning tendencies. An older airplane will show these tendencies more than a more recent trainer. We have our good old slipstream, we have P-factor, we have torque, and we have gyroscopic precession. Slipstream, I'm not going to insult your intelligence, everybody knows what it is, the airflow that spirals around the fuselage. P-factor also. The way I explain that to my students is that you just take a tailwheel airplane, or you take a tricycle gear airplane, and you just crouch down and you put your eyesight at the same level as the prop, and you see both blades with the exact same form factor. Now, if you take a tailwheel airplane and you crouch down and you look at the prop from underneath, you look at both blades, and then that's how you visualize the P factor, the fact that the aspect of the blade is different when the relative wind is hitting the propeller disc at any angle that is not perpendicular. And guess what? All the piston airplanes suffer from P-factor during the climb, right? Well, guess what? Tailwheel airplane suffers from P-factor on the ground. Some airplanes have a different deck angle and suffer from it less, but other airplanes, you can really feel it when you taxi because the airplane wants to turn left. And in the Super Cub at Chandler Air Service, and I know that we're going through right brakes much faster than we're going through left brakes for that reason. Torque, obviously, when if the prop is turning right, there's a counter reaction when the fuselage will have a tendency to roll to the left. You don't really feel that too much, but when we get into higher horsepower single engine airplanes, we may feel torque on the takeoff roll, where the airplane trying to roll left puts more weight on the left landing gear and has more friction. It's another effect that makes the airplane want to yaw left during the takeoff roll. So we would feel torque in this case. And gyroscopic precession, I'm going to pick on Jim. Where is Jim? Jim, you're a tail instructor. Can you tell us about gyroscopic precession?
That's when you go to pull back, there's a 90-degree opposite to the
Right. The gyroscopic precession, if you apply a force to a gyroscope, the resulting force is going to be 90 degrees ahead in the plane of rotation. That's a lot of big words there, but what it boils down to, on the takeoff roll, when you lift the tail, you apply a downward force to the propeller disc, and it results in the force yawing the airplane to the left. Spike is not here today, but he flies a Newport. It's a replica. The real Newport, I believe, had the rotary engine. And the rotary engine, I've read about it, and I can only imagine what it could be to fly these airplanes with. If you push the stick down, the airplane goes left in flight, because now you have the whole engine rotating, the whole engine being a gyroscope, and you have to deal with gyroscopic precession. The only people who deal with gyroscopic precession on a daily basis are people who fly rotary engines, people who fly aerobatics, and the tail will pilot during the takeoff roll. And guess what? On the landing roll too. If you do a wheel landing in the SNJ, when the tail comes down, you have gyroscopic precession, and the airplane has a slight tendency to go right. You don't feel that in the L-16 or in smaller airplane, because it's function of the weight of the gyroscope, and obviously the propeller in the SNJ is much bigger than on the L-16, but you would feel it. And guess what? All those slipstream, P-factor, torque, and gyroscopic precession, we're going to experience all these factors during the takeoff roll in a tailwheel airplane. Do you have any questions so far on what we've covered? We've talked about negative stability, we've talked about stalls and spins, and we've talked about left turning tendency. That's kind of the basics for our discussion here. Next part, we're going to talk about what we can do to prevent accidents. Any questions? So what can we do to prevent incidents or bad things from happening in a tailwheel airplane? There's a lot to talk about here, because there's different phases of flight or operation, and believe it or not, accidents in a tailwheel airplane, or incidents I should say, can happen in any of these. You can have an incident in a tailwheel airplane when you start the airplane. I've seen it happen. Not to me, fortunately, but I've seen it happen. We'll talk about it. Taxiing, running up, I've seen an accident happen. I've seen with my own eyes an accident happen during a run-up. Takeoff, landing, obviously. So how can we prevent this? Well, we talked about procedure, technique, and experience. We can talk a bit about procedure, we can talk about technique, but nothing replaces experience, obviously. We need to know what to expect and anticipate what's going to happen to make sure nothing bad happens to us, right? So what's the big deal about starting a tailwheel airplane? I mean, it's an airplane, it's an engine. What could happen? Fire, of course, on an older airplane, we don't want that, but that's not specific to tailwheel. What can go wrong when you start a tailwheel airplane? I don't know. Take a guess. An incident can happen in a tailwheel airplane when you start it. The only time it's stable is when the engine is starting, it's in the chocks. I will make a believer out of you. This was not a starting incident. This was it's another one, we'll talk about it later, but if the tire tells you to make the next intersection, I tell my students, don't even answer, don't even listen to them. They are not in a tailwheel airplane. If they're in a rush, you can tell them offline. If they're not happy, you can call them and tell them, you know, it will take much longer to clear the runway if I rush to get off and I close the runway on you than the few more seconds I need to get the speed under control before I turn. So, taxiing. Bad things can happen when you taxi also. We talked about earlier that what are the most unstable conditions is when the speed is pretty high and there's not much wind on the rudder. Well, if you taxi a little fast, that's exactly what can happen, right? A way I like to look at it is you want school zone speed when you taxi a tailwheel airplane. Anything faster than school zone speed, you're taking a chance here. What is the other technique that you use when you taxi a tailwheel airplane? You want to do S-turns, right? Because most of the wonderful airplanes that we fly here, you cannot see anything in front. But just because we're getting bored otherwise, we need to make things more interesting. So might as well not see anything. So you're gonna do S-turns. Let's watch a movie.
Oh.
That hurts. S-turns. S-turn is kind of a misnomer. You don't want to be in constant turning. The way I like to do S-turns is more zigzag. So you do a straight line about, 10, 15 degrees off one way, go to the edge of the taxiway, not too close, and then turn the other way. And the idea of S-turns is, in theory, you would see the yellow line on the taxiway on each swing. If you're in the back seat of the steerman, it's a little easier than if you're at the front seat of the SNJ, because the angles from the back seat, you see the yellow line of the center line of the taxiway with less deflection. You need less deflection. But doing S-turn, I always tell my passengers, it's not because I had too much to drink last night, but you need to, if you do rides, you may want to explain that, because people will really wonder what you're doing, especially before takeoff. Am I sure I want to fly with this guy if he's taxiing like this? No, we do it for a purpose, and when we don't do that, bad things can happen. That was a bad thing, but that was an even worse thing. That's a sad photo, actually, because I think there was a fatality on this mishap. That was in Oshkosh a few years ago, the TBM tax. I think the guy in the back seat of the RV didn't survive that. S-turns. Besides a good practice for lateral stability, too. Okay, so we started the engine with no mishap, we've taxied with no mishap. Now we need to do the run-up. What do we need to keep in mind when we do the run-up in a tailwheel airplane? Anybody? Matt? Any thoughts? Keep the stick back. Face the wind. Face the wind, keep the stick back. Well, let me back up. I'm going too fast here. Taxiing. Where should the stick be when we taxi? In a tailwheel airplane.
Depends on the wind.
It depends on the wind. Let's say the calm wind. We talked about stability and lack of stability before. If we taxi the airplane, or whenever the engine is running, most of the time we can do that. Sometimes we're doing stuff on the radio, but we want the stick all the way back to put some weight on the tail, especially when we taxi. There's exceptions, some airplanes don't like the stick all the way back. The SNJ, you compress the straw, it's not good. The 17, you don't want that. But, L-16, Stearman, lighter aircraft, you want the stick all the way back when you taxi. If you read the books, they will tell you, well, if you have a tailwind when you taxi, you want the stick forward. Personally, I don't buy that, because in theory, yes, if the wind is really strong coming from behind, if you have the stick forward, the elevator is down, it pushes on the tail. What I always used to tell my students is just put your hand outside in the Cub or in the Stearman or even in the SNG. Where's the wind coming from? Is the wind coming from the propeller, or is the wind coming from behind you? If you don't feel the wind coming really strong from behind you, don't put the stick forward. If it's kind of equal, maybe the stick neutral will do. If you really need the stick forward because the wind is that strong, maybe you shouldn't be flying a tailwheel airplane in the first place. So stick back most of the time. If you have a tailwind, kind of judge the situation, consider maybe the stick neutral. Where should the ailerons be placed?
Depends on the wind.
It depends on the wind. If the wind is coming from the front, what's the saying? You want to dive into the wind, or climb into the wind or dive away from the wind, right? So if you have the wind coming from in front to the right, you want right aileron. If it's coming from behind you to the left, you want right aileron, away from it. What I like to see when I fly with somebody who is getting checked out in an airplane, I want to see that stick moving. taxi. I don't want to see the stick in one position and then we turn and the stick remains in the same position. Because now the angle of the wing to the airplane changes. The stick needs to move with the wind, follow it or go away from it, but it needs to change. When we turn from the taxiway 90 degrees and then to the runway, the stick should follow what's going on there. And you end up on the runway with the stick pointing towards the wind, ready for a crosswind takeoff if we need. So run up, let's go back to run up. Face the wind, stick back, hold the brakes, stick back. Face the wind, stick back when you do your run up. Bad things can happen there too. That wouldn't be cool. Now we're ready for takeoff. And the takeoff in a tail airplane is a lot of fun. For me at least, for him, I think it was fun. The point was, remember the photo of the L-16. Yes, you can get behind such a small airplane if you're not used to tail airplane. And the takeoff roll is a demonstration of left-turning tendencies. What happens in the takeoff roll? Well, you're going to line up on the runway. You're going to have the stick all the way back. If we have position and hold, line up and wing, if we have a line up and wing clearance, a good practice on airplanes that cannot see forward is not to line up straight on the runway because now the engine is on the way, you cannot see what's going on. So a good practice is to line up at an angle and see the center line of the runway and make sure you visually confirm the runway is clear before you start your takeoff roll. I try to do that. Sometimes I forget, but I try to do that. So line up, the stick is back, and now we're going to gradually apply power and get into the takeoff roll. And the takeoff roll is going to be 3 phases. First phase, the tail is on the ground, we gather speed. Second phase, we lift the tail wheel off the ground and we gather more speed. Third phase, we rotate or we start climbing out. I was reading the other day that a revolutionary guy, or a guy had this revolutionary idea in 1909, I believe, that on the takeoff roll, you don't pull the stick back until you fly. Think about it. 1909, whatever was known about aviation at the time, who could think that you need to push the stick forward during the takeoff roll before you can fly? It's totally unnatural at the time. Somebody had that idea, I think it was a Frenchman, Henry Fallon. That's what I read, I don't know if it's true. Anyway, somebody had to think, wait a minute, if we keep pulling back, we're not going to take off, maybe we should do something different and go on the mains and gather more speed before we fly. What a novel concept. So anyway, we line up, we start applying power, heels on the floor on the takeoff roll. We don't want to use brakes on the takeoff roll, right? The point is to gather speed, not to slow down. Heels on the floor. And we apply power. The bigger the engine, the slower I'm going to apply power. I learned that in the Pitts. The Pitts is a small airplane, very light, 260 horsepower. If you slam the throttle, it's going to, you're going to be airborne before bad things happen, but it's going to really look ugly. So I apply the power slowly and I feel my rudder. Okay, now it has rudder effectiveness and we're good to go. And we're going to keep rolling and keep gathering speed with the stick back. In some airplane you don't want all the way back. In the SNJ you don't want the stick all the way back, otherwise you compress the tail wheel too much. In the 17, same thing. But towards the back, until you have enough speed to positively raise the tail and have rudder effectiveness. If you raise the tail before you have rudder effectiveness like we did in the L-16, then bad things happen. So you don't be in a rush. In the Cub we used to teach you count to 3, but it's a judgment call. Each airplane is different, each condition is different, each weight of the passengers may be different. But you feel when you have rudder effectiveness, now is the time to use the tail. I love the C-45 because the C-45, the stick, the yoke goes forward by itself and the tail goes up. You don't even have to think about it. But not all airplanes are that well behaved on the takeoff roll. So guess what happens? You have the tail wheel, the stick back, you start applying power. What left turning tendencies do we experience at that time? We have the slipstream effect that is mostly prevalent at really low speed with the power going. As the airplane accelerates, the vertical stabilizer corrects the slipstream and we don't feel it as much. But we're in a tailwheel airplane, the disc is at an angle compared to the relative wing, so we have P factor at the beginning of the takeoff roll. So we're going to need some right rudder when the engine turns to the right. Then we lift the tail. We're going to talk in a minute how high to lift the tail. Rudder authority, yes. It's not to see better in front of us. It's not to look cool. We look cool by default, so we don't need it. Rudder authority is one. Another one is to reduce aerodynamic drag of the wing sitting at an angle like this. In the B-25, when we land, we keep the nose high because the big wing at an angle creates a lot of aerodynamic drag that helps slow down the airplane. On a tailwheel airplane, if you stay with the wing like this, it's going to be much longer before you pick up your speed. So you want to lift the tail to reduce that aerodynamic drag and pick up speed so you can fly. Even more, we're going to talk about short field takeoff in a little while, but in the German, I understand if you try to do a 3-point liftoff, which is you keep the tail on the runway by decision, you want to do a 3-point liftoff. I guess in this German, you need how much runway to do that?
400 more feet.
Okay. And because the engine is not very powerful, some airplanes, like in the Super Cub, I used to teach 3-point liftoff for short field takeoff. In the Stearman, that's long field takeoff. So we lift the tail to reduce the aerodynamic drag. We have more rudder authority, like you said, Rick, because now the rudder is more perpendicular to the airflow. But there's the question, how high do you want to lift the tail? And some people like to keep the tail kind of low, right over the runway, and some people like me like to have almost a level flight attitude on the runway when we take off. Why do I like that? And I'm not saying I'm right, I'm just saying that it's a question of personal preferences, and some airplanes will be better with the tail higher, and some airplanes will be better with the tail low, and some airplanes, like I don't know, Jason was flying the Bearcat, you don't want to leave the tail too much on the Bearcat, otherwise bad things will happen. But I like to have the tail a little higher because I feel the airplane a little more stable. I put a little forward pressure on the stick, and I have a little weight on the mains, and the relative wind is perpendicular to the vertical stabilizer on the rudder, and I feel the airplane less unstable. I shouldn't say more stable, I should say less unstable. I like it better, personally. Let's watch another movie. It's not really a movie. That looks good. If any indication, this was pretty flat and the tail was pretty high on the takeoff. Well, that's Bob Odegaard, by the way, that's the day he flew race 57 to Stellar. So pretty much it's personal preference how much you want to lift the tail. One thing that is important to me is you don't want to let the airplane take off before it's ready. I don't think I want to take off in ground effect. So I want to keep at least enough weight on the mains to control and decide when the airplane is going to fly.
Francois, that's exactly why we don't do 3-point takeoffs in the Stearman.
Right, you don't want to.
Transition and ground effects not safe.
That's not safe. Right. And guess what? If you do a transition in ground effect while you're still in a 3-point altitude, you're going to need a lot of right rudder there because of the P factor. Most people who are new to tailwheel airplane, if you train in the Cub where you keep the tail pretty high on takeoff and you level flight altitude, they're concerned they're going to hit the prop. I know I was when I did my checkout with the J3 at the time. Unless you touch the brakes, or unless you fly an airplane that has a very short clearance like the Bearcat, you're not going to hit the prop. It's not going to happen. The airplane is actually pretty stable like this. And we're going to talk about a little exercise that we do to demonstrate. That's Billy again there. Amazing. So, now we've done with the takeoff. We're not worrying about the landing yet. We've dodged the bullets so far. The airplane is in one piece, and we're happily flying an old airplane, and we're having fun because we're either open cockpit or making noise with a radial engine. In flight, a tailwheel airplane will behave the same way that a non-tailwheel airplane, with the difference that we talked about it. We fly older airplanes that are more demonstrative, and so we're going to feel more adverse yaw, we're going to feel more P factor, and those good things. So rudder coordination is a big deal in older airplanes. When I fly in an airplane that I'm not familiar with, or if I haven't flown an airplane for a while, the first thing I'm going to do is dodge walls. Maybe it's a misnomer, but I pick a point straight ahead, and I'm going to go left and around, left. And I start a coordinated turn, left and around, left rudder one way, and before I get the bank, but before the airplane starts turning, I go the other way. And if we do it right, we're going to go left, right, and keep the nose on the point straight ahead. That's a great exercise to get familiar with an airplane that we're not familiar with. And the older the airplane, the more demonstrative it will be, but at least we can imprint in our mind how much rudder we need when we do aileron deflection. So adverse yaw is an important thing. I see sometimes, I fly with younger pilots, and I see a very common mistake that some people make is to push on both rudders at the same time. Have you seen that, flight instructors in the room here? The thing is, if you push on both rudders at the same time, you don't know if you're putting right or left rudder. There's no way to tell because you're fighting yourself. So that's an important thing. And a very common mistake that I see in more demonstrative airplanes also is you take off and you start the climb, and there's going to be P factor, so the airplane is going to want to yaw left. A lot of people not used to older airplanes are going to put right aileron because they see the nose going left, and without thinking too much, they're going to put right aileron to fix that. That's not the right way to do it. Keep the stick in the center, put right rudder to counteract P factor. That's common mistakes. The key when you fly these older airplanes is to maintain positive control at all times. You want to be the master of your aircraft in flight because you really need to be the master of your aircraft when you land. So it starts when you fly. You cannot fly sloppy and land well. You need to be the master of your aircraft at all times. Develop aggressive finesse. And we talked already about the stalls and spin characteristics that are a little different. So now it's time to land. We've had fun and we need to come back to Earth. And landing is typically when bad things happen in a tailwheel airplane. And actually landing roll is typically when things happen. We're talking with John just earlier, talking about, we mentioned clock speed, we mentioned aggressive finesse. John was saying you need to be in the zone. It's true. You need to get in the zone before landing. You cannot get yourself distracted. You need to concentrate. You need to detect deviations early and fix them quickly. So landing roll. Bad things can happen. So we don't want to judge because it could happen to anyone. You look at this picture. What do you think could have been done better that maybe could have influenced the outcome of this landing? Stay back. Look at the elevator. Two types of landings. We can do a three-point landing or we can do a wheel landing. A three-point landing is what would feel normal to a tricycle gear pilot because it's a full stall landing. You come right over the runway and increase the angle of incidence, the airspeed decays into a three-point attitude, and you land. Things to consider during a three-point landing. You need to visualize your three-point attitude in a once you're on the ground before takeoff in order to reproduce it when you're in the flare. If you don't remember your 3-point attitude when you get to the flare, you're going to be guessing and you may end up tail wheel first or main first or something like that. So it's a conscious effort when you taxi to, okay, where is the horizon intersecting the cowling or the struts on the steerman? With a caveat there is that when you're taxiing, your struts are compressed. So you need to allow for this. When you taxi, you visualize the nose attitude and you allow for the strut to uncompress when you land. And you want to reproduce this pitch attitude in the flare. Now, what also is important in the flare? You look straight ahead, you don't look on the side, you use your peripheral vision. You stay off the brakes. Now, a very important thing also, you want to kill any drift that you could have before you touch down. Because we've learned earlier that the airplane was negatively stable. Well, we knew that already. But negative stability will do what? If you touch down with a little yaw there or a little skew, it's going to amplify that and we'll have to work much harder to keep the airplane straight. I'm lazy, I don't want to work hard. So I'll try to kill the drift. I want to kill any drift before we touch down. Once we're until a 3-point landing, once we get on the ground, hopefully we have 3 points at the same time. That's a miracle usually, but I cannot do that. I always have one or the other. What do we want to do at that point? Stick all the way back. There's exceptions, but most of the time, most lighter airplanes stick all the way back. Because now we want to get into a position where the airplane is the least unstable. And we saw earlier that the least unstable is with weight on the tail wheel that gives us some friction that helps us keep the airplane straight. And we're going to continue looking straight ahead and stay on the center of the runway. Now we have the landing roll, and that's actually when things usually happen. We fly the airplane all the way to the chocks, that's what we say, right? Another invented statistic for you. I think most ground loop happen at the end of the landing roll when the pilot starts to relax. Oh, my landing was pretty good. Okay, what do I do next? I have another ride. Oh, I need to stop at the grocery store for lunch or something like that. And you start relaxing, but the airplane is not done. The airplane is not done until you're in the chocks. So at the end of the landing roll, you want to make sure your clock speed doesn't suddenly go down and you get distracted. Because that's, the airplane is kind of mischievous a little bit for that. It's waiting to see when the pilot is going to lose concentration. It's just grab you and slap you on the wrist. Landing roll, you keep your concentration up. You don't want to turn off the runway too early. You want to slow down before you turn. In the SNJ, you need to push the stick forward to unlock the tail wheel before you turn. We had that happen to us a couple months ago. I was with somebody who was checking out in the SNJ, and he learned very quickly, you don't unlock the tail wheel too early, because otherwise the airplane will do a 180 or a 360 on the run. Well, hopefully you won't touch anything. We didn't. But the airplane went 90 degrees pretty quick. And that's why I love my job as a tail instructor, because you sit there in the back and you smile and you wait for things to happen. Your job is just, at that point, your job as an instructor is just to make sure the airplane doesn't hit anything, but you let the student make a mistake, because I know for a fact that this guy will never unlock the tail wheel too early now. Don't rush turning off the runway. Now, on the landing roll, if something doesn't look right, the airplane starts to go sideways. What can you do? Well, first, don't put yourself in that position, obviously. But if something starts to look wrong, and like the little video of the mall that we saw earlier, and it starts to really, you don't know what's going on, what can you do to help? Add some power. Stick back, make sure the tail is on the ground. Brakes, I don't know. If you have to use brakes, yes, but I don't know if brakes... Yeah, last resort, I don't know if brakes would not make things worse, actually. But adding power is actually a little miracle in disguise there. You don't want to stamp the throttle. Don't take me wrong. Bad things would happen there, and bad things have happened to people we know. I'm thinking Nazi, for example. But add some power that will change things, where you had the momentum of the airplane pushing you into a ground loop. If you add power at the right moment, before it's too late, there's a point where it's too late, you can't do anything. If you add power before it's too late, now the prop is pulling the airplane and it's trying to keep things straight. It's blowing the rudders. You'll have more rudder effectiveness at that time. So power may be a good solution, but don't get there in the first place. Okay, we talked about three-point landing. Let's talk about wheel landing. What is a wheel landing? Wheel landing is a very unusual maneuver for somebody who's not used to it, because you get close to the runway and the mains touch and you need to move the stick a little forward. At least if you want to stay on the mains like this. The way I see a wheel landing is, well, first you need more speed to do a proper wheel landing than you need for a three-point. A three-point, you want to stall the airplane. A wheel landing, you don't want to stall the airplane at all, ever. Even more than that, in the approach and the final during a wheel landing, the way I used to tell my students is, you want to stay on the front side of the power curve, if that makes any sense to you. You want some energy, you want some speed, you want to be able to control the airplane and not get to this, what do you call it, the region of reverse command, where you need more power to go slower. No, you want to stay, you want to keep some energy. If you get too slow, don't even try to do a wheel landing. Do a three-point instead. I used to tell my guys, if the wheel landing doesn't look good, do a three-point. If the three-point doesn't look good, do a go-around. Don't try to force it. So you want to stay on the front side of the power curve, and you want to, well, there's different training schools of thought there, but ideally I would think a wheel landing, you get right over the runway in a level flight altitude with almost no sink rate, and you just kiss the wheels there. And what's going to happen there if you don't do anything? If let's say you come and you descend and you touch down, but you still have a little downward motion, well, the mains are going to stop on the runway, but the tail wheel is going to continue going down, right? And when the tail wheel continues going down, it's going to change the angle of incidence of the wing, that suddenly are going to generate a little lift, and you're going to bounce. It's not a bounce because you have bungees on the main landing gear. It's a bounce. It's an aerodynamic bounce on a wheel landing. So what I do on a wheel landing is you get down to the runway, and as soon as the main touches, just nudge the stick forward there to prevent the tail from coming down, the wing for suddenly generating more lift and bouncing. That's a technique. There may be some aircraft where it's not appropriate, but that's the way I do it in the SNJ, for example, or in the steering. So you get there, just nudge it, and you're back to the same tail attitude that you had on takeoff. Personally, I like fairly level attitude, like a cruise flight attitude pretty much, and a little nudge on the forward, on the stick, and keep it on the mains, put a little weight on the mains. The worst thing you could do is if you don't put that nudge and then you start bouncing and push the stick forward then. That's what Russ calls the beach bounce, right? And the Beech 18 is known for that. If you're desynchronized with this, bad things can happen. Everybody knows Jean-Claude Van Damme. He's an interesting guy. I don't know if it's steroids or stuff, but I recommend you going to on the internet looking at his interviews. He says stuff that are really out there. One thing he said, if you use a jackhammer during an earthquake, make sure you desynchronize yourself, otherwise it's useless. Think about it. Very profound. But the point is, it's the same thing with the bounce there. If the airplane bounces and then you push the stick forward, then you're going to push the airplane down, and you're going to go, oh shoot, the runway's coming. You're going to pull the stick back, and then you're going to go like this. Don't do that. It's worse. If you have a bounce, well, maybe you can salvage this doing a three-point, or maybe just go around. So when the main touchdown, a little nudge. If you're too late, then Don't try to fix it and make it worse, actually. One thing that I like about putting a little weight on the mains, we're talking with John McGoffin yesterday. He's flying his Lockheed Vega 1933 or 35 airplane that has apparently some interesting quirks on the landing wall. If you do a wheel landing like this, and you put a little weight on the main, you're going to compress the struts. I think I like to compress the strut earlier rather than later, because if the struts are not compressed when the tail comes down and then suddenly compress, you run the risk, if you have a little crosswind, that's what I was talking about, that one strut may compress but not the other one. And that would make things even more interesting. I don't think you want that. So you want a little, that's another added benefit to do this. So you have the tail up to a point, and at some point the tail needs to come down. Two things here. First thing is, we had gyroscopic precession when we lifted the tail during the takeoff roll. If we have a big enough propeller, we may feel gyroscopic precession when the tail comes down. This time, it will make the airplane yaw to the right. Be ready for that. The second thing is, we had an interesting talk with Carter Teeters a few months ago after we had some things happen to the steerman. And Carter was telling us that in the steerman, and maybe in other airplanes, you can run out of rudder before you run out of elevator. So if you do a wheel landing, and like some people, I used to do that, I was wrong. I was taught at some point, you keep the tail up until you run out of elevator and then the tail falls. You don't want to do that, especially in the steerman. That would not be a good place to be, to have the tail still up and no rudder effectiveness left. So you want to fly the tail down while you still have authority, like we do in the B-25, or like I tried to do in the B-25, fly the nose wheel down, but I failed miserably doing that. In the tail wheel, in a wheel landing, you fly the tail down with authority, and what happens when the tail gets to the ground? Stick back. So now you're in a situation, you go from on the mains, with a little weight on the mains, and the relative wing perpendicular to the rudder, not too unstable, to another not too unstable situation, which is tail wheel on the ground and weight on the tail wheel. That helps with the friction.
Francois, as the tail comes down, you say you get the opposite effect as when you rotate to the two-point attitude.
Right.
And what force is that from?
Gyroscopic precession. This, let me qualify this. You will not feel that in the L16. I don't know if you feel it in the steerman or not. I felt it in the SNG. You want a fairly, gyroscopic precession is a gyroscopic property, so the heavier the gyroscope, the more you're going to feel it. The propeller of the SNG is big enough so you can feel it, and the L16 you won't. So it's just to be thorough, we're talking about it. So the question is, what type of landing to choose? Should we do a wheel landing or should we do a three-point? Well, first, is a wheel landing more dangerous than a three-point landing? Would there be more accidents in a wheel landing than a three-point?
You're faster at the scene of the accident.
Billy said you get faster to the site of the accident in a wheel landing. I don't necessarily agree with that because, that's one of those, we were talking about statistics earlier. Somebody was saying, well, most mishap on landing in the steerman happens during wheel landings. Okay, so you would think, so wheel landings are bad because there's a greater risk for ground loops when you do that. But think about it, maybe there's more wheel landings in the first place. Maybe people prefer to do wheel landings in the steerman in the first place, and therefore that's when accidents happen. Personally, I don't buy it. I think we should, as tailwheel pilots, be proficient in both types of landing in the aircraft we fly, unless there's a standard operating procedure that says that this aircraft should be flown one way or the other. Beach 18, I'm more comfortable doing wheel landings. I don't know if we do. I have never done a three-point in the Beach 18. Russ says no. In the B-17, we do wheel landings. C-47, I guess we do wheel landings too, right?
Francois, my dad was trained as a Navy pilot during World War II, and this may be some story I remember from my dad way back then, but he said that the Navy never taught wheel landings. He said that through primary, they started out in a chief or a champ, they went to the steerman, and they went to the SMJ, and I want to say he told me that they never taught wheel landings when they went through.
So Rock's saying that the Navy never taught wheel landings. Bill, you were flying the SNB in the Navy, were you?
I flew in SMBs for the Navy, it was for an outfit that
Okay.
did carry.
So I can see the Navy not teaching wheel landings because when you land on an aircraft carrier, you probably don't want to do wheel landing or thing. But the point is, if we fly the L-16, if we fly the Stearman, if we fly the SNG, we should be proficient in both types of landing. Actually, FAR 6131 says that a tailwheel pilot should be proficient in both types. And there's benefits to 3 points, and there's benefit to wheel landing. Some people say when the wind is howling and it's gusty, you prefer. Some people, or crosswind, very strong crosswind, some people prefer to do a wheel landing. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think it's a judgment call in every situation, because if you do a wheel landing, eventually the tail needs to come down. And if the tail comes down when the speed is lower than what you would approach on a 3-point, you may put yourself in a corner on a strong crosswind there. But, it's a judgment call. We should be, that's kind of the repertoire of things that a tailwheel pilot knows how to do. We know how to do a 3-point, we know how to do a wheel landing. Depending on the situation, we choose which one we want to do. So a good exercise for wheel landing, and I've done that at Chandler Service in the Cub, and I do that in the SNJ too, is you take a really long runway. Usually in the SNJ I do that when we do a no-flap landing. And we come in and we do a no-flap landing and touch to wheel landing. Why? Because, well, that's one of the case, On a no-flap landing, you may prefer to do a wheel landing because your approach speed is going to be higher no matter what. And we keep the tail up and do a wheel landing, keep the tail up, add a little power, and we stay on the mains. We have 10,000 feet of runway at Gateway, we have plenty of room to do that. And it's a great exercise for people new to the airplane to visualize the side picture that you need in a wheel landing and have a little fun with it. So we stay on the mains, add a little power, and now we're driving down the runway on the mains. And some instructors are not comfortable to do that. It's perfectly fine. I'm foolish enough to do it, but we go on the right wheel, keep it there, go back to both, go on the left wheel, keep it there, go back to both, until we get scared and the end of the rudder approaches, at which point we apply power and we go. It's a good exercise because if you do this, and you do not have enough forward pressure on the stick, it's going to get ugly real quick. That teaches you just the amount of pressure you need to stay in control of the airplane when the tail is up on the takeoff or wheel landing. But that's one of the things we do.
Francois, is Russ back there?
Yeah.
You might mention what you got out of Midland, that they want us to do that in the Stearman as well. Going from one wheel to the other
It's a training
in
exercise.
training exercise. Same thing.
Okay,
But
Stearman,
that's a
same thing.
recommendation that's
Right.
in revision 8.
Right. And personally, I think it's a really good exercise. It needs to be done correctly. In the Stearman, remember, is there a dihedral on the bottom wing of the Stearman?
Is there no?
A dihedral at all?
Very slight.
A very slight dihedral. If you're flying a low-wing airplane with a slight dihedral and you do this exercise, don't go too far. You don't want to have to buy more bottom wings or wingtips, fixed wingtips. In the Cub, it's easy. You can actually have a lot of fun. The SNG, you need to be careful. There's a dihedral. And the Stearman, you need to be extra careful. But you need to be extra careful in the Stearman no matter what, right? Do you have a
Do
question?
you have to change fore and aft stick when you do that because the friction is changing as you come on 2 wheels, 1 wheel?
Yeah, I think you do. I don't think about it. I just try to keep my pitch attitude, but you're right. You may have to, the control stick is not you fly. So
It's not
whatever it
much.
takes. It's not much. On the takeoff roll, if you lift the tail, as you pick up speed, you need less and less forward pressure because there's more air on the control surfaces. Okay, so we talked about three-point landing, we talked about wheel landings. Let's talk about crosswind landings. I don't know if this is a really good demonstration of a crosswind landing three-point or if it's the beginning of a ground loop. I don't know.
He's got the stick back.
The ailerons are both deflected maybe with the flaps, so maybe it's a ground loop. I don't know, I guess. Crosswind landing technique in a tailwheel airplane. Nothing different than a tricycle gear, right? You want to kill the drift, you want the aileron into the wind, and you want to use the rudder to keep it straight down the runway. Kill the drift before touchdown. One thing that we're talking about yesterday with Russ and John McGoffin is, what do you call it, Russ? Steer into the wreck. Let's suppose this was a ground loop started. And a typical ground loop, one of the wings is going to lift, right? And you're going to, in this case, you're going to scratch the left wing tip. So what Russ is saying is steer into the right. If you're in this situation and you put right aileron to try to get back to normal, what happens then? Well, guess what? We're going to get aileron reversal, adverse yaw. So putting right aileron may make the airplane yaw to the left even further. So Russ says steer into the right. If you put left aileron, the adverse yaw on the other aileron may actually help you with full rudder to stay straight. It's easier said than done. Billy, you say stick neutral, right? In this gym.
Yeah, if you can think it.
If you can think of it, stick neutral. Because if you don't put stick neutral, you can also drag the aileron, which is not good. So, we talked about crosswind landing, three-point or wheel landing. Personally, I think if the wind is really strong, I would do a three-point. If the wind is really strong, I would consider landing somewhere else, maybe, and be using the airplane another day. There's another situation that is not cool, is quartering tailwind. That's me battling a quartering tailwind right there in France. I don't like quartering tailwind. I really don't. You lose your control effectiveness. I think I've felt even control reversal on quartering tailwind. It gets ugly. I am the first one to maybe not make friends with the tower, but at this point I don't care, and ask them to change the runway. Because sometimes they've been pretty good lately. They've been pretty good. When the wind reaches about 5 knots, I come back from a ride and I think, well, maybe I'll ask them, and we come back and the runway's already turned. But in the past, there's been a couple of cases, no, it's fine. Well, do you think we could change the runway here? And I'm more than willing to circle for 5 or 10 minutes there and have a safe landing and try to land one of these airplanes with a quartering tail. It's not cool. At any time I almost got in trouble was with quartering tail. I really don't like those. Right?
Francois, when you had everybody hold their hands up about did you ground loop or not? I came this close to a ground loop in a Cessna 185. I was landing it from the right seat in my spraying customer on the airplane. And he had a Robertson kit on it. And of course, you look at a 185 and you see that big ventral tail, and you think that that's going to fly forever, right? Quartering tailwind, it will not. So I, as the good pilot stud I was, I drug that thing in and rolled the tail wheel on right at the end of the runway. And when I got the mains on, the rudder had quit flying. It took every ounce of brake judiciously used to keep that 185 from going off the runway. But I didn't, and I didn't dip away. So they'll quit, and the quartering tailwind is absolutely murder.
Yeah,
if you do it.
I don't like it. I think, I don't know if we want to make it a wing policy to help. When we talk to the tower, if they're resisting changing runways, we could say, hey, we have a wing policy that prevents us from landing with more than, 3 knots, 4 knots, whatever. We may want to consider that. But
We had that to steer.
yeah, well, is that an official policy? Because if we can tell the tower, we have a policy, we are not allowed to land in these conditions. maybe that will help in some situations. Although they've been really good. But like Rex was saying, quartering tailwind, you're going to lose your rudder much sooner than if you have even no wind at all. And personally, I like my rudders. I like it. Don't touch my rudders. The fact is, the quartering tailwind is not only bad for landing, it's also not good for takeoff. Anybody knows about this incident? Want to talk about it, Matt? You did, okay.
I can't remember how fast we were going, but it was good downwind takeoff.
It was a downwind takeoff.
Everybody got out. I don't think the airplane survived. It burned, yeah. They got everybody out. But total downwind takeoff. No need for it.
Yeah.
What is it? B-25?
It's a low slow
It's
down.
a-
The Learjet,
Oh, okay.
modified load strike.
Low stress.
So this is not even a quartering tailwind, it's a full-blown downwind.
Yeah, it was pretty strong.
Yeah.
Hey, Francois, we watched the Minnesota wing L5 properly on the quarter, so they got to with Tony Canada, goes calendar guy and back to me. So put it up on his nose and put it over on his back. That's about 5 years.
We need to preserve these aircraft. We cannot do that to them. All right, landing roll. In any case, we talked about it already. We're going to go fast on this, but use your peripheral vision in a 3-point altitude, because eventually we'll get to a 3-point altitude. Not like this guy. This guy is looking at the photographer and smiling. We don't know if the next few seconds are less smile or not, but he's not looking straight ahead. Stick back when the tail is on the ground. Stay on the center line. It's not over till the airplane is fully stopped. And do not hesitate to apply power or go around if things start to get out of hand. Detect early and correct quickly. Use aggressive finesse. Of course, there's these guys, but that's a whole different story.
All right, and there he is touching the airplane down. It bounces just a little bit, but he told me it would. There he is, ladies and gentlemen, an inverted landing by Craig Hosking. Now, how do you get him out of there?
I would be so scared to do that. The name is Craig Hosking, I guess. You get this show where he set a set of landing gear on the top of his S2. For real, yeah. No, so opposite choice, no, I'm not even gonna think about it. Okay, short field takeoff. Typically, a short field takeoff in a tail airplane involves a 3-point liftoff. Some airplanes, actually, it doesn't work that way, like in our Stearman. We used to do that in the Cub at Chandler, and go, so you line up for takeoff, obviously at the very end of the runway, you start applying power, and as you start the takeoff roll, you just relax the back pressure. You don't go forward, you don't go neutral, you just relax by about that much back pressure, and the airplane will lift off in ground effect, at which point you need quite a bit of right rudder to keep it straight, stay in ground effect to accelerate and go. We're not going to go too much over that. We cover this in the SNJ during the checkout. We do at least one, so we've done it. I don't think we would use it really on the short field takeoff. We never operate on runways that require that kind of thing. Short field landing, I think personally in a short field landing in a tail airplane may be a little easier than a tricycle gear. We used to do that in the Great Lakes at Chandler. You come in, you drag some power, you come in pretty low. Instead of using 1.3 times stall speed, we use 1.2 times stall speed, whatever it is. Come a little slower. You drag it with power, fairly flat approach, and you get right over the number. You pull the power and keep the stick back, and go shtook. You just plop it there, and use brakes, don't nose over. We do it once in the SNJ also, and if you do it in the Stearman. It's just for demonstration. It's not really something that we need to use. We don't want to be in a situation where we need to use this technique. It's a good technique to be exposed to and use that. So what can go wrong in a thermal airplane? You know this video? Yeah. Beautiful steering. It's not a happy ending, let me tell you.
It's a demonstration of red line brakes. That airplane had less than 10 hours since restoration.
So what was the story? There was a photographer in the front seat who wanted a better view and decided to prop himself up by putting his feet on the top of the rudder pedals.
Oh.
Yeah. Right as they were landing. And I had a guy do it to me in our airplane the other day, very close, just got the edge of the wood kit.
I'm going to confess something to the class here. This is group therapy, you know. Maybe we'll have, maybe we will have time to share some ground loop stories after that, because I think, you know, we can learn a lot about other people's mistakes, hopefully. I dinged an airplane once with a student. The guy just locked the brakes on me. One brake, actually, for some reason, in the Great Lakes, Chandler, and the airplane went 90 degrees right, 90 degrees down. And the fact is, for instructors in this room, the brakes is the only control that the instructor cannot override from the student. If the student pushes the stick the wrong way, you have muscle power to override that. The brakes, you cannot do anything. In the Stearman, I try to get that in my briefing. Stay away from my pedals and take off and landing.
Sometimes more briefings are important.
Yes.
Right before you land, I found that out.
Yes. I've, like as a little side note, I've developed a little mnemonic when you do rides to remember what to cover in the Essenger and the Stearman. And the mnemonic is briefs, belts, refuse, zigzag. If you have one, they're not going to get sick. If you don't have one, that's when they get sick. So zigzag, refuse. Intercom, cover how the intercom works. Exit, it's mostly in the Essenger and the Stearman. I don't think we need to cover much. Fire extinguisher and seat belts. And I think belts and maybe B will stand for belts and brakes. Stay off the brakes.
Every time we do a ride to Stearman, we tell guys this story, when we come to the end, and say, don't touch the brakes.
Don't touch the brakes, don't touch the rudder pedals.
They don't want you, you know.
Francois, we have, a lot of times what we do, especially a lot of rides, a lot of volunteers who may or may not be putting people in the front and the back seat, especially on the steering. And somebody who was helping me yesterday on a couple of rides was telling me all about rudders, kind of center ball, and do all this kind of stuff.
Oh, God.
To which I promptly told them, keep your feet flat on the floor. And the only rule of flying with me is keep your feet flat on the floor. In a much nicer way than but just realize that if you're not giving the pre-flight briefing yourself, you may or may not know what they're telling them. So make sure you tell them to keep your feet flat on the floor, especially if you're taking off.
Yeah, that's a good point. Keep your feet flat on the floor in the Stearman, in the Essenger also. If I'm not too lazy that day, I actually would climb in the front seat of the Stearman or back seat of the SNG and adjust the rudder pedals all the way forward. And that's much better. Sometimes we fly with the pilot and we move them back and he said, yeah, you can use the rudder if you want, but most of the time you want that. Right?
Francois, we don't kiss and tell, but there's a very famous Stearman pilot by the name of John Moore. And when you were talking about the starting accident, that you can even have an accident in a tailwheel airplane. It's a little known fact that John started the Stearman that he owns and without anybody in the cockpit and no chocks. And it ate the left or right wing of like a Cessna 120 before it stopped. That was way back before he started it.
Maybe we'll have some stories that we can have a little group therapy after until Cal starts. I like that. Hello, my name is Francois. I'm a recovering ground looper. I've done my ground loop. Okay, get this out of the way. 1995 in Chandler in a supercut between the runways. Free lesson, didn't touch anything. Made a big cloud of dust. Free lesson. I learned a lot that day. So remember, we're flying those older airplanes that are more demonstrative. Use your rudders. Beware of brakes. Brief passengers. Let's watch another movie, shall we? We're nice on the center line until a point where we're not anymore. Oops. Did you see the elevator the whole duration? The elevator was, stick was forward. I'm going to repeat myself. Detect deviations early, fix them quickly with aggressive finesse. Use brakes only in last resort. Keep the stick back when the tail is on the ground. That's a sad one too. That's a super nice guy from Canada who came to Chandler for training. They trained him in the pits. He bought the pits. And then I helped him fly the pits to Canada because he was a fairly young pilot and didn't feel comfortable flying all the way there. And I left him there. And landings were not really good, but you know, cross country is a little different story. I left him there. The next weekend, took the airplane out, and that's what happened to him. Sad. He's been repaired and he's flying it since. But if it doesn't look good, go around. Don't slam the throttle, but go around. Avoid quartering tailwind. But the thing is, the question is, do you think this guy started his day thinking that's how it was going to end? You're not going to expect it if it happens to you. Be prepared. That's another bad one. That's an embarrassing one right there. So what I read is, so I don't want to judge once again, but the story was the tailwheel lock did not work. I don't know if that's sufficient reason for this, but or maybe it's a little long. Now, let it run. So this guy flies fighters for Red Bull, I think, in Germany. Not cool. And then you have the walk of shame coming down. If this happens, what do you think? Do you think you should continue taxiing?
I think it'd be a good idea to get out when you're here.
I think it may be a good idea to look at the prop. You don't know what touched or didn't touch, or don't make it worse.
Right now, he's saying that never happened.
Yeah. What? Doesn't happen.
Is that when they have?
Yeah.
So there's a website out there. I spend my life on the internet. There's a website called warbirdalley.com. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I go there once in a while, but it's a little depressing sometimes because you pretty much it's a guy doing that in his backyard, and it hasn't been updated for a while. But any mishap that happens or anything that happens in the Warbird, there will be something there. My goal in life is never to show up on Warbird Alley. And check it out if you want.
I think he said, I thought you had.
I thought you had it.
Not yet. But the point is this. I'm not immune to this. Nobody here in this room is immune to a ground loop. No disrespect here, but it's the truth, you know. The airplane does not know how many thousands of hours you have, how much experience you have. It doesn't care. It will embarrass you the same way, regardless who you are. No discrimination there. Look at this. I don't know what happened there, but everybody needs to develop a healthy respect for the airplane, and no one has immunity for embarrassment.